You're listening to The Voice of Reason with Mark Reed and Ted Durden, only on LA Talk Radio.
Good evening, and welcome to another edition of The Voice of Reason. My name is Ted Durden, a Southern Democrat.
And I'm Mark Reed, a West Coast Republican. I almost forgot who I was, Ted.
That's what I'll always remind you. It must be that COVID-19, right?
Exactly.
And together we are the Voice of Reason. For those of you tuning in for the very first time, this is a politically motivated podcast where civil discourse is the order of the day. You know, got me messed up. Civil discourse is the order of the day. Well, Mark and I discover we have more things that unite us than that divide us. And as I do every week, I toss the ball over to my good friend, Mark Reed.
My monologue tonight it's titled, Is the United States Committing Economic Suicide? Houston, we have a problem. That problem is COVID-19. Named for the coronavirus disease in 2019, first identified in Wuhan City, China. Our government is taking actions which appear to be excessive and misguided based on the concept, mind you, of cost versus benefits. These actions at a minimum are shutting down portions of our economy. The ambiguities of the unintended consequences are extremely problematic in that the cost of these actions are massive and may become severe enough to cause a recession or even a depression. What value do we expect to receive from these actions? Based on the most recent evidence, it appears this virus is most damaging to the elderly, especially those with medical problems. Mm-hmm. What is the cost of the common sense concepts of washing your hands, staying home if you're sick, identifying at-risk signs, a high fever, cough, or even a sore throat, reacting appropriately, adjusting protocols at nursing homes, reasonably segregating at-risk persons, etc., etc. Can we make a rational extrapolation of these common sense costs and compare those which will result from the proposed protocols? The value differential must be evaluated. That accumulated comprehensive data should inform our adjusted actions. We probably have the requisite evidence to guide us on how we should expend our energies most effectively and efficiently to mitigate the damages which will be caused by the virus. There are now about 5,000 deaths worldwide. I think it climbed up a little bit since I wrote this. What if the year's totals were 100,000? Would that cost rationally necessitate our shutting down our normal activities? The World Health Organization estimates the worldwide annual influenza epidemics result in about 3 to 5 million cases of severe illness and about 250 to 500,000 deaths. Using 4 million cases and 375,000 deaths, kind of averaging out, it shows a mortality rate of 9.375. Once again, as FDR said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Let's use common sense and get back to living, because this is outrageous, is what's happening right now.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I agree 100%. I mean, the panic that is set in is mind-boggling. It really and truly is. And as you so clearly stated, we have more people that die every year from the flu virus. The normal flu virus.
Well, even tuberculosis.
Right. I mean, and even comparatively, you look at the number of children that go missing every year that are never found. Look at the number of children that die from starvation every year. And yet, here we have a disease that is very easily preventable, where people have simply lost their mind. There have been fights that have broken out in supermarkets in the meat department, people fighting over toilet tissue and paper towels. It's almost like a sign of the end times. That's what it seems like. The last time we saw this sort of behavior in the United States was from the stock market crash of 1926, 1930. But we're nowhere near that level right now. People just need to just calm down and just relax. They really and truly do.
I tell all of my friends, so long as they're still printing the LA Times and the Daily News, we'll never run out of toilet paper.
Or Breitbart paper, not magazine. Anyway.
Breitbart. I'm nonpartisan in the issue of toilet paper. You know, the Democrats can go and buy The Art of the Deal by Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. There's 500 pages in there. Right. And the Republicans can go out and buy the Hillary Rodham Clinton book.
Yeah, that too.
That one's cheaper because it didn't,
Didn't sell that many.
Didn't sell that many.
It sure did.
They can go down there. Yeah, it's just people need to use common sense and realize that we're all human beings. We're all surviving. We're all looking at this from our own perspectives. But the reality of it is America will never starve.
No.
We're never going to have massive problems. We have people dying every day. Use common sense of how to take care of yourselves. If your children are sick, you keep them home from school. If you're sick, you stay home. If you're an employer, I'm an employer. If my employees are sick, I tell them to stay home.
Exactly.
I'll give them a paid day off. This is how you address this kind of an epidemic that is being created. This fear-mongering by the press. You know, I mentioned it in the last episode, and I said it in a kind of a tongue-in-cheek way for the conspiracy theorists out there. Is this a real attack on the American economy, orchestrated by China, orchestrated by the world powers out there to really damage the world economy, precisely the United States economy, and precisely targeting President Trump? Because for the first time in American politics in the last 60 years, we have a commander-in-chief who doesn't mind using our military to target the commanders of the other armies, not the armies. He doesn't want to kill a massive amount of people.
Right.
He's going to target the commanders. He's going to go after them. If you're a bad player out there, he's going to take you out. And the economy, he's making in NATO, in the UN, he's making them pony up their fair share, what they've agreed upon to create these organizations, making them pay up their fair share, what they agreed upon. In the trade negotiations of intellectual property rights and theft, cyber theft, everything else, he's making them renegotiate these trade agreements, and saying, look, the best products went out. I think, honestly, that the liberal left of the world, not just in America, but the liberal left of the world and dictators of the world have been enjoying the free ride for so long that they're in a panic because they've been making easy money. Just think about this. The last 3 major epidemics have come out of China, right?
Oh, no, that's very true.
Okay. China had a 2025 agenda of becoming a dominant world economy, surpassing the United States. If Donald Trump, President Trump, did not become our president, they would have achieved it. Where would we be now? Now, we were ahead of the ball. I interviewed, if you remember, Rosemary Gibson, the author of the China RX.
Right.
I talked specifically about the supply chains, how in medicine, in pharmaceuticals, generic drugs, also in medical supplies, also in technology, artificial intelligence, they hold the key. They're dominant in every one of those fields. They talked about the respirators. Do you know why there's a shortage of respirators? China last year stopped shipping the circuit boards for the respirators. This is why we don't have them. And then you look at the medical industry here in America, including the military. They do what they call a risk assessment.
Right.
They say, well, are we going to need them? They got 20,000 plus respirators in the military. Every state has got anywhere, I think New York said they had 16,000.
Right.
They need 30,000. Right, but they did a risk assessment. They said, how are we ever going to really need this many respirators? We got 16,000. It costs $40,000 a piece, anywhere from $25,000 to $40,000 a piece. They did their own assessments. Do we need them? No, we don't need them. But this is where our politicians, our Congress has allowed, through the exportation of jobs. China didn't steal our jobs.
No, we let it go. We gave it away.
We gave them away.
We gave it away.
So we gave away the manufacturing. What China has done in all respects is use the world court and the laws of the different countries against them to dominate the economies. They've done it very successfully in America by dominating all of our pharmaceuticals, all of antibiotics, all the vitamins, intellectual properties, manufacturing. Even some of our military hardware is produced in China. What are we doing and who are we electing? They used to think that Donald Trump was bodacious in his comments about how stupid we are. I have to say, he was probably right on the money.
Well, I'll agree in the concept in the sense that we gave away a lot overseas. We did.
What was the motivating factor, Ted?
Well, no, the motivating
greed.
Yeah, I was going to say the motivating
Okay.
factor was greed. That's what it was. The motivating factor was greed. Our political leaders over the last 5 decades have done little to assist the companies in this country from making a product that was profitable in America. What happened is a lot of the jobs and the manufacturing went overseas, where there was cheap labor that we couldn't begin to compete with. Right. But a lot of it had to do with the way that a lot of the labor contracts were negotiated. It became so burdensome in this country. It did. Now, Donald Trump, even before he became president, did he at times take advantage of that? Yes, he did. But now he, as the leader and seeing and recognizing the economic inequities between the United States with our European partners that were in NATO, demanded that they pay a fair share, and along with the competing countries such as Japan, China, and other countries where even as far as our intellectual property is concerned, is being stolen and compromised. And he has done his best to turn all of that around.
Well, the way that China stole the intellectual property is they would allow a business to come over there, and China owned 51% of the business, and you had to turn over all the intellectual property.
Well, it's not just that. It's the way that the Chinese government, Japan is no different, are in bed with the companies in order to make sure that they make money.
Japan's a free marketplace. It's not as drastic. China people, because in our school systems they're not teaching about communism. The kids graduating school right now have no concept what communism really is. They think communism and socialism hasn't been given a fair chance to succeed.
Right.
And it's like, you know what? Let me send you to school over there and give you about 5 years, and you'll come back here. You'll kiss the dirt when you land here.
Sure.
And you'll realize exactly what communism is. It's a totalitarian government that can care less about the individual life of a person.
Right.
If you stand up against them, they don't mind making you disappear. You're going to get buried in the backyard.
Right.
You look at where this virus started in Wuhan, and it moved over to South Korea, then it moved over to Taiwan, then it moved over into Europe, it moved over into, and it's not talked about as much, it's in Iran, big time. Okay, 10% of the parliament in Iran has the disease. Okay, the second in command there died already. They're not talking about how many deaths. I get feeds constantly about people just passing out, landing on the ground. This is horrid what's happening there. It's far worse than what they're reporting.
I would imagine.
And it's because of the totalitarian governments are not releasing that information because they don't want to create hysteria. But just like, you have to be a little cynical about this, just like our countries to the south of us, with Honduras and Nicaragua and El Salvador, the people that are running those countries are drug cartels. They don't care about the poorer class, the average person. They prefer those people leaving the country. They want them to leave the country because they don't want to take care of them. They don't want to feed them. They don't want to listen to them bitching and complaining. They want them to go. So my conspiracy theorist propaganda aspect of it on this show is, was this really released and or generated to kill off the aging population that's a massive expense to the healthcare systems and the people who have, or younger, who have health problems, underlying health problems? And on that note, we have a special guest this evening. It's an exclusive interview with Dr. Wen Chen. She was born in China at the end of the Great Cultural Revolution, being victims of the horrific atrocity that killed 2 million intellectuals and destroying traditional Chinese culture. Wen's parents had mixed feelings about her education. Despite their discouragement, Wen eventually won a national prize at the science competition when she was 16 years old. What are our 16-year-olds doing now?
Not that.
Hence, she was accepted into the top university for undergraduate study. In 1994, Wen came to the United States for graduate school and received a doctorate in biology at the California Institute of Technology in 2000. Because of her personal experience of being brainwashed in China, she decided to be a voice of the voiceless. Since 2012, she has given over 200 presentations to community organizations about about Chinese culture, history, and human rights. Dr. Wen Chen has been working for Caltech since 2000 as a scientific curator at genomics and biological knowledge. Part of her everyday work is to speak at scientific conferences and seminars, universities like UC, San Diego, and Harvard Medical School. In her personal life, she is an active member of the Amnesty International chapter at Pasadena, a board member for Caltech Women in Biology and Biological Engineering, and a special event host for Caltech Alumni Association. She lives in Pasadena with her husband and 2 teenage daughters. We'll be welcoming her back. We'll be welcoming her onto the show when we return from this advertisement to pay the bills. Okay. To the Voice of Reason. Thank you for joining us on our show. And because of this whole, we're closer than we're supposed to be, but we're not going to shake hands. Nobody shake hands. Well, I'll do the chicken wing with you, doink, like this. But thank you for coming on to the show. And I know, I feel very honored to have you on the show, to be honest with you, because I think you bring a different perspective than most of the talking heads that we see on Fox News, CNN, MSNBC. So of all the things that you heard us talking about, one of the things you talked about prior to that, you are actually calling it, and most of the Chinese people are calling it, the Chinese Communist Party's virus.
Yes.
Yes, because tell me why that you're calling it that. Because Trump just called it, the
Kong flu,
the coronavirus, the Wuhan virus, and he was called a racist for saying that. It originated in China. Come on.
See, I have been speaking on human rights in China for decades, okay?
Yes.
And for decades, I've been hearing people say about, oh, China did this, China did that. I said, I'm Chinese, okay? The Chinese Communist Party took over China and destroyed the traditional Chinese culture and persecuted millions of Chinese people.
Mm-hmm.
Millions of Chinese people are killed because of their religion, because of their political view. And it's unfair to say this is a Chinese virus because this is what Communist Party is using to target Chinese. We are the victims. So yesterday I saw an article on the Epoch Times calling this CCP virus, the Chinese Communist Party virus. And today I also saw another article published on Washington Post, also called it the Communist Party virus. So I want to distinguish Chinese from the Chinese Communist Party. And as a matter of fact, there's a movement now in China of quitting the Communist Party. Chinese people have been sending statements through VPNs on a website to abandon Communist Party. Say, I want to quit the Communist Party, quit the Youth League, quit the Young Pioneer, because you cannot quit from the Communist Party itself. You're going to be sentenced to jail, right, if you say I want to quit. And that's why people have been publishing statements online through a website called the Tui Down Movement. Right. And I think a couple of days ago, I saw 350 million Chinese already quit the Communist Party and its affiliate organizations. So it's very much like the Soviet Union before it collapsed. The people thought, oh, miracle. But no, for decades in Soviet Union, people abandoned communism.
So do you think that there's the beginning of a revolution in China?
Yes.
Against the Chinese Communist Party at this point? And do you think that this virus is going to be the catalyst of it, that they've had it? Because it's going to affect the Chinese economy as well.
Yeah, I think this trend started, of quitting the Communist Party started, I remember it started in 2004, because that's when I sent in my statement to quit the Youth League of the Communist Party. And I think now, you see, the problem is many Chinese, they were so brainwashed for decades. They say, oh, I don't care about politics. I don't care about human rights. But when coronavirus hit them, the virus hit them, they suddenly realize, okay, when we lose the freedom of speech, we can be fooled for months. We didn't know that we need to take protection. when there was an outbreak in Wuhan. And that's why they got into so much trouble. The whole China was locked down like for weeks, or maybe we don't know for how long. As a matter of fact, my parents in China are still in quarantine. They're in a small town in southern China, not Wuhan.
How much information do you think we're truly getting out of China that's actually correct? Is the new infection rate, is it zero now? Is it flattening out, or you think what are you getting from China?
I would never believe in the number published by the Chinese authority, because they have a long record of manipulating the statistics. Like as you probably know, like the whistleblowers, the doctors, when they chatted about the coronavirus, they were punished by the police officers. And I just today, I saw another article published by the Epoch Times from an internal source. They saw one report to the Wuhan Health Commission. Basically, it's an internal report that said on March 14th, they had 91 confirmed cases of Wuhan, just that one particular day. But the official number published by Wuhan Health Commission is 4 confirmed cases.
Just 4, not the 91.
That's
91.
That's this March.
Yeah, this March.
Year.
This March,
Okay, this
March
March.
14th. Okay, last year there were no coronavirus.
None. Well, it started.
But it started in December, right?
It started in December, and
Yes.
they actively kept that hidden. And in fact, the doctors that were bringing it to the World Health Organization there in China, they were told not to speak about it.
Right. As a matter of fact, there were samples that were destroyed. My question to you, doctor, is when the outbreak first happened, when the first sign of the virus showed up in December of last year, what do you believe was the motivation behind the Chinese Communist Party to quell it, to make sure that it did not come out?
This is the typical way they deal with contagious disease. I mean, they did the same thing with SARS outbreak. They suppressed the news, they suppressed the social media from discussing anything about it, because the Communist Party cared most is what they call stability, the economy, the image. So when the first outbreak started, the officials basically say, okay, we're going to have the New Year, we're going to have the Chinese New Year, we have these conferences of the authority, and they don't want anyone to talk about it. And they probably didn't realize it would be so bad. So that's why they successfully blocked many incidents like that in the past. It's that their standard practice of blocking people from speaking out. But this is probably out of their expectation, because when the first coronavirus outside of China was reported on January 13th in Thailand, a woman from Wuhan traveled to Thailand and then was discovered he had coronavirus, and she was quarantined. And then that's when news all over the world realized, okay, Wuhan has been exporting coronavirus.
Right.
And that's when the central government became alerted, because they probably were worried about this will affect Beijing and other cities. That's when the test kit was distributed to Hubei province on January 16th. They started to test the case, started to report, and then the central government, under the pressure of the central government, they ordered the quarantine of Wuhan, and they ordered the quarantine of whole China. But see, it's very interesting. The Communist Party, they have a very interesting way to deal with disasters like that. So actually, I'm very surprised. To a certain extent, they liked a disaster like that, because they always turned it into an opportunity to promote communism. For example, whenever there are disasters, they would ask for donation. All right, and everything, you cannot donate anything to hospital. You must donate to Red Cross China, the branches of the central government, and they are not international Red Cross. These are the government branches. The Red Cross China is controlled by the Chinese government.
Right. Okay.
And according to reports from China, everything donated to Red Cross, we're talking about medical supplies, food, everything essential, only 1% of them were distributed. And they were primarily distributed to the officials, to the Communist Party members and their relatives, not to
the Chinese citizens.
Not to the Chinese citizens, not even to the frontline medical workers. As a matter of fact, the Lancet published an article, open letter, from 2 Chinese medical workers who went to support Wuhan, said, we are very lack of resources, please donate to them. But then, under the pressure of the Chinese government, they retracted that open letter later. And we've seen tons of reports like medical workers at the front line, they are very lack of medical resources. And actually when they punished the whistleblowers, like on December 31st, right, the Wuhan Central Hospital actually asked the doctors and nurses not to wear face masks, not to wear protective suits. That's just unbelievable. They were told don't wear anything protected because we don't want to cause anyone to be panicked.
Any panic.
So, as you mentioned at the beginning, the Communist Party, they don't care about the health of the people. They don't care how many doctors will die.
They only care about the survival of the Communist Party.
Yes, that's why you see the Communist Party members, they got all the resources. They got the best face masks, the best protective suits, all the food, donated by other cities, were distributed to them. This is the real life of Communist China.
Okay.
So the last three major viruses that have come out, have been worldwide, have come out of China. Do you think that the government, the Chinese Communist Party, is developing them and unleashing them on the world on purpose, or is it accidental? I mean, how is it that the last three have come from China?
Well, okay, I'm a scientist, so I don't like to speculate without any evidence. Okay, that's my habit. But I can tell you what I find suspicious. Okay, there's something very suspicious. It's about patient 0. So who was the first person got ill? That's very obvious, right? For every other outbreak in other part of the world, we were always able to find who's patient 0. Okay. And imagine China, they have so much facial recognition, surveillance.
5G over there.
I mean, they should be it should be the easiest for you to find out in China who was patient 0, but the Chinese government never found patient 0. They had no motivation to find that. And as a matter of fact, right after the outbreak, they informed the WHO about coronavirus. The first thing they did was to close the Huanan seafood market and clean up the market. Don't you think that's very interesting? Okay.
Well, based on what I've been reading on here, the December 10th. How do you say his name? Wei?
Why?
Wei
Guixian.
Wei Guixian?
Yeah, that's the first patient reported by the...
But you were telling me earlier there was another one before
there was
on December 4th?
Yeah, that was according to a medical paper published by The Lancet. It was a research article. They studied all the earlier cases. I think the first case was a patient who had symptoms at around December 1st, and he went to the Wuhan Jinyintan Hospital, another hospital. And according to the BBC interview with a hospital doctor, this patient, he had a stroke and he had Alzheimer's disease, so he had not left home for months. So he cannot be patient 0. Okay, someone must have visited him and contacted him and spread the virus to him. And he had never been to the Huanan seafood market.
Well, did they ever interview him to find out who he might have come in contact with?
That was so interesting because it's been so long. The Chinese government never figured that out.
That's ancient history now.
Well, I know that it is, but you would think at the time, like I would imagine, I'm theorizing here a lot, that when this gentleman was admitted to the hospital and when he displayed the symptoms that he did, I would imagine would have alarmed the doctors, and that the first thing they would have done, because I know that's what they do here, who have you been in contact with?
Yeah.
And then who you have contracted it from?
Did he pass away before they were able to identify what was wrong with him?
I don't know about any more information, but it's kind of interesting. Like the doctor told the BBC that, we're still trying to figure that out. I guess they will never figure that out.
No. I like I said, I look at it and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and I don't believe in conspiracy theories in particular, but when you look at a massive amount of smoke, you start moving the smoke away and you start looking for the fire. Where is it at?
Right.
I don't believe what's going on. I think there's something bigger happening, and even though one of my consultants constantly tells me, don't go down that road, I say, no, you have to think outside of the box. What is really happening? because I don't get all, I'm not like the average person out there. I go still go to the store. If I can't buy what I normally buy, I find what I need to buy and I get it and I bring it home and I eat it. So I'm not freaking out like the average person is freaking out there. I tell everybody, just calm down, relax, do what your parents taught you. You wash your hands. If you don't feel good, don't go in contact with people. If you see somebody who's sick, don't go up and give them a big kiss. You just stay away from them, and that's about it. You just do your basic hygiene in society. I mean, we were always taught as kids, you're out in public. People spit. People have sicknesses. You don't touch your hands on things and stick them in your mouth.
Right.
That's not what you do. We were taught, even in school, we were taught never to spit on the ground because it's just disgusting. Because you're passing your fluids onto somebody else. So you cared about your society. So when we're watching society going through what it's going through, it's hyped up, massively hyped up by the press. It's massively hyped up by the reactions of our political officials right now. So I look deeper into it and say, why is it happening? We're going to dive a little bit further into that after we take our break and pay our bills. So look forward to seeing you at the other end of the advertisements.
All right.
Hi, I want to welcome Rusty Levin and Harry Nabanian, both trial lawyers for workman comp cases. If you're injured on the job, don't hesitate. Contact an attorney. I did when I was wounded or injured on my job, and I thought I would trust my employer, and it didn't work out quite well. So I found Rusty Levin, handled my case like a professional, worked out way better than any other lawyer that I talked to would have worked out. So Rusty, tell us a little bit about your company of Levin and Nabanian Trial Lawyers.
So at our firm at Levin Albania Trial Lawyers, we handle all matters of workers' compensation, personal injury, and employment disputes, wrongful termination matters, and things like that. We were able to help Mr. Reed out with his workers' compensation case. Unfortunately, workers' compensation injury can be very stressful, intense situation. And at Levin Albania, we try to get you the most benefit we can of the law, while also easing the stress and anxiety that comes along with that situation, and getting you back on your feet. My partner, Mr. Nalbandian, he handles the personal injury sides, and I'll let him take it from there.
And just like all injured employees out there, anybody else who gets injured as a result of somebody else's negligence has rights, and the rights that they need to protect immediately. And they should do that by calling Levin and Nalbandian Trial Lawyers and letting us help ease that tension off of you and get you the result you deserve, while also making sure that you get better in the progress. So we're here for you, folks.
Levin and Nabanian Trial Lawyers is the best company for you to get a hold of when you're injured or have a personal injury. So give them a call at
213-232-4848, 213-232-4848. Thank you.
And let them handle the stress for you while you recover at home. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Hi, my name is Ted Durden, and I want to take a moment to talk to you about trust, and I trust churchandlaw.com. When it comes to workers' compensation and employment law, you can trust churchandlaw.com. If you ever need legal advice, you can rely on it's churchandlaw.com. Black and white, no gray, churchandlaw.com. 818-230-3110, churchandlaw.com. A law firm you can trust and count on.
Welcome back to the Voice of Reason, where we have a special guest, exclusive interview with Dr. Wen Chen. We were talking off camera for a moment about what is really going on in Wuhan and the origins of this particular virus. Now, there's a lot of things flying around. They're saying that it was created at the military laboratory there for the bioengineering. It was released into the meat markets. Was it just, how would you say, naturally mutated in the bats and in the snakes and stuff? Tell us a little bit about what's happening in Wuhan and why you, as a doctor, as a scientist, don't believe these things, and what do you theorize it possibly is?
I think right after the news came out, right, the Chinese government insisted that it originated from that seafood market because they sold live animals, and they said, it came from bats. And indeed, many most of the cases, original cases, came from that seafood market. But according to the Lancet article published by Chinese researchers, among the first 41 patients of COVID-19, 13 of them had never been to the seafood market. And they were the earliest patients, including the first patient who had symptoms on December 1st. Mm-hmm. He had never been to the seafood market because he had been had a home for like months. So obviously, somehow the disease was brought to the seafood market, and then there was an outbreak. But they must have some other sources. And many people thought about that lab, the Wuhan Virus Institute, Virology Institute. And it was interesting because I found this institute has been studying SARS virus and studying coronavirus for quite a few years. And they have been doing something very dangerous. According to one of the articles published on Nature, that's the #1 magazine in medical research, the Shi Zhenli, one of the scientists, researchers in Wuhan Institute of Virology, she has been doing the gain-of-function study. So what she did is she did mutations or recombinants to SARS virus and bat virus and make them more invasive, more contagious, more powerful. And that's so dangerous. You can imagine, once this virus escape from the lab, it could be a disaster to human being, right?
So that's biomedical warfare, basically.
Yeah,
basically, they've been studying that. And
well, what is the purpose for that? Why would they want to do that? Is there a stated purpose by the Chinese Communist Party?
It's quite interesting because at the beginning, the 2015 paper was a collaboration between Wuhan Institute of Virology and a lab in North Carolina, University of North Carolina, and the U.S. government, the NIH, also partially sponsored that. But later on, people immediately pointed out this is too dangerous. You can say we're doing science, we're curious, and then you create more dangerous virus that can ruin the humankind.
Right.
So U.S. stopped funding this project. So the University of North Carolina stopped the research. But obviously, the Wuhan Institute of Virology has been continuing the research. And because in 2018, Shi Zhenli gave a presentation in Fudan University about the progress of her research. And basically at that time, she said, we're going to inject this more dangerous virus to monkey to see what's going to happen. And obviously, they have been doing that. And they're capable of inventing a more dangerous virus, very similar like what we are doing. And of course, right after the conspiracy theory came out, Shi Zhenli insisted, I didn't create this virus. I created other virus. This one is not created by me. And then 27 world top public health professional published a statement on Science magazine say, she didn't do this. But it was interesting, if you look at the list of these 27 scientists, half of them are either collaborators of Shi Zhenli or they have been getting fundings for research from the Chinese government. So they have the incentive to defend her, right?
Right, so they be politically motivated.
Yeah, but that's how the mainstream media picked up the statement, say, this is not genetically engineered according to the scientists. But basically nobody can prove that she did not do it. Nobody can prove that. Of course, we cannot prove that she did it, because you can never visit her lab.
Right, yeah, because no one would have access to the research that she was doing.
Yes, and it's quite interesting. Just in the conspiracy theory, right? Of course, Chinese government rebutted that. So, we didn't do that. But on February 17th, Xi Jinping announced China is going to have this biosafety law. And I'm so surprised. This is 2020, 5 years after the Wuhan biosafety lab was established. Mm-hmm. I'm so surprised that for 5 years they've been doing research without any legal procedure, without any law, any regulation. And that made me feel suspicious. This, whether or not this is genetically engineered, we cannot conclude. But obviously, it's the CCP virus, let's call it the CCP virus.
CCP virus
is 96% identical to a bat virus discovered in Yunnan province. That's 1,000 miles away from Wuhan. There's no way bat can fly to Wuhan to infect people. And this Wuhan Institute of Virology has this virus in their storage. So they have been studying a virus 96% identical to the CCP virus. So we don't know what happened. And as a biology student, and I always know that in China, okay, you can have serious regulation, but how people follow the rules is a serious problem. As a matter of fact, on January 3rd this year, after the Wuhan virus outbreak, one of the researchers in China was sentenced to 12 years in prison for selling lab animals to the local markets to make money.
I heard that story.
Yes, you probably heard that story.
did.
And as a matter of fact, the SARS virus escaped a virus lab in Beijing at least twice in 2004 and caused some deaths. So China has a history. Okay, researchers sold lab animals and virus escaped the lab. And once they escape lab and carried by human or animal, you don't know what's going to happen to them because they're going to mutate into something very, very bad.
Right, and it's kind of like what you talked about a few moments ago, that they would inject monkeys. So whether the monkey escaped or was released into the wild, like I said, a bat's not going to fly that far. But they have monkeys that travel, they migrate, and they interact with other monkeys, then of course it would be very easily spread. And at that point, all they would have to do is come in contact with one human. That's all it takes.
Yeah.
It reminds me of that movie with Dustin Hoffman called Outbreak.
Right, yeah.
Remember that one? It's
Right.
a monkey that brought it out there. But how is the Chinese government, now that this is getting out, it's worldwide, everybody knows it, what is their propaganda machine and how they're spinning this now?
So it's quite interesting. I mean, now let's go back to the original topic. Like the Chinese government, the Communist Party can always turn disasters into something to their favor. For example, now they have this propaganda machine say like the world should thank China for rescuing them because of the big quarantine. Okay, they don't want to talk about like how they punished whistleblowers, how they, made it happen because they could have contained it at the very first moment. And they're going to export the China style of quarantine. And we know like the China style of quarantine, actually in Wuhan, probably many, many people died.
Yes.
And we are never going to know the actual number. I mentioned at the beginning, if they say like a 91 confirmed case, you can change them into 4 case, and then they can easily change the death case to much lower.
Turn that off.
But
Shame on you.
and
Leave it to me.
and actually, it's quite interesting nowadays. China claimed that they have 0 confirmed cases yesterday in Hubei province.
I heard that, yeah.
They claim that,
They claim it.
but like the schools are still closed. As a matter of fact, my parents are still in quarantine, all right? But they're actually recruiting overseas Chinese to go back to China. They're actively on WeChat and everywhere, like, the 5 Dime Party, right?
Right.
Like they're sponsored by the Communist Party to spread, to make this campaign on internet, say China is doing great, we have no coronavirus, but US is outbreak, they're in disaster, you can't even buy bathroom, tissues and
paper
should
towel.
come back to China. And once these overseas Chinese go back to China, they have to go through 14 days of quarantine. That's so interesting, as if like China is clean and the rest of the world are all contaminated. And you go from US to China, you have to go through 14 days of quarantine. And then Chinese government starts say, now all the confirmed cases were from the overseas Chinese who came back from US, from Italy, from Canada. And I think that's their conspiracy theory to make the world feel like China is the only country that's controlled the coronavirus.
Well, they started passing the rumor around that the U.S. Army released it in China. And that's where it originated from.
Yeah.
Now, do you think that the U.S., I've testified in front of the FCC on 4 different occasions, involved the vertical integration consolidation of media. But the further I dig into the financial interest that all of our media and global corporations that control media have financial interest in China. Do you think that they too are being manipulated by the Chinese government because they will lose everything they own in there, all their investments?
Definitely, we have to talk about the 2 aspects. Like now, it's the current, right? Like you probably know the Chinese government can easily influence Western media through 2 approaches. Number one is like most of the Western media, you cannot do interviews in China. You cannot send reporters to China. That's why you have to take the Xinhua news agent, like the Chinese government's standard report.
Right.
So like the Chinese government actually, the China Watch is called the China Watch supplement. It's an English newspaper insert, and they are carried by LA Times, New York Times, Washington Post. So basically, they pay all these mainstream media to distribute the China Watch supplement. And you see this insertion in mainstream media. You read LA Times, you say, oh, this Communist Party, these stories all favor the Communist Party, right? They're written by China, but then they are paid as advertisement, but they look like real news articles.
Looks like real news, but they're not.
Okay, and that's number one. And number two, through education. For decades, Chinese government has been recruiting researchers, professors, or successful businessmen to China for red carpet treatment. And once you come back from China, you feel so great about yourself because everything in the tour, right, is arranged at the time, ahead of time. And then usually they would write something favorable about China. If you're a professor in university teaching journalism, very likely you're going to teach your students, say, Communist Party is doing great because I went to China and I saw all these nice schools, everyone was happy. And then journalists, these students graduated with a good positive impression towards the Communist Party. They will definitely write positive articles about China when they work as journalists.
We're going to dive in a little bit further into that. We're going to take our last break, and then we're going to go into the finality of this interview. See you at the end of it.
My erstwhile opponent says I don't accept debate invitations. I accept the League of Women Voters invitation.
The League of Women Voters LA chapter was the one who invited him to the 5 debates with the battered women's organization, with a synagogue, 2 churches, and the American Legion. And he turned down them all flat with the League of Women Voters. Welcome back to the Voice of Reason with our special guest, Dr. Wen Chen. We were discussing about how the students, leave America, they go over to China, they get their prearranged, propaganda given to them and fed, and they come back here and say how beautiful everything is over there because it's all set up for them.
Right.
It's no different than a person inviting if they're an abuser of their children, they invite the person from the child health services in, and the kids' toys are out and everything looks great. They go home, and meanwhile, the kid's locked up in the dungeon and underneath the house.
Right.
So, and that's how these totalitarian governments work, or communist governments work, a majority of them. Now, the Chinese government here, I know, have a lot of massive financial interest in think tanks here. Manipulate the thought process in America. They also own board seats on a lot of our, and I'm not going to name them, but a lot of the Ivy League schools here as well. So they are infiltrating the thought process and the thinking machines in America to normalize the, attitude towards China.
Yes.
Okay, so I want to touch on that. I also want to touch on the continued human rights violations in China, because I've watched several interviews of women in China just furious about what's happening, that there's no voice. There's no voice of the Chinese people.
They have no rights.
They want to speak out. They want to be heard. They want the international community to hear their voice. I was very heavily considering playing one that Yan sent me. It's very emotional to watch it. And she's so upset about what's happening there because the world is getting this forced propaganda on them that the Chinese government, not the Chinese people. I know a lot of Chinese people. I love them to death. My neighbor's Chinese. He has a garment industry. The Chinese people are way different than the Chinese government, and the Chinese government is heavily involved in human rights violations. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So I have been speaking on human rights issues in China for many, many years. And I think one of the biggest topics now is about the forced organ harvesting. And it's interesting, like when we talk about the Wuhan coronavirus outbreak, right? I sometimes wonder, why Wuhan? Why this city? And then I realized, like, Wuhan actually is a very interesting city. It's a very notorious. It's notorious for human rights abuses. And one of the reasons you may have heard about the forced organ harvesting.
Yeah.
The Chinese government has detained millions of people because of their belief. I think the biggest group under persecution is called Falun Gong. It's a meditation group based on the traditional Chinese culture. And Chinese people meditate for thousands of years for better health. But the government of China think like this is independent thinking, it's a challenge to their authority, just like how they shut down the whole education system during the Cultural Revolution, because they thought anyone got education can get independent thinking. Let's shut down all the schools. And Falun Gong to them is the same because it's independent from communism. And they realize about 10% of Chinese people do this meditation that's not controlled by the communists. You can easily brainwash them because they have their own principle, truthfulness, compassion, tolerance. And they started a massive persecution in 1999, put millions of them in jail. And in 2006, we realized that the Chinese government has been taking organs from them for transplant. And people in the US wait for years for donors, right? You wait someone die from car accident. But in China, people can easily find organs within 1 to 4 weeks because they have millions of people in jail. They're blood typed, they're tissue typed, they're just ready to be killed. And let me tell you some very recent news related to the coronavirus. Chinese media just recently announced that they did 3 transplants on coronavirus patients because they failed. The lungs failed. They need new lungs, so they had 3 lungs transplant surgeries on February 29th, March 1st, and March 10th. And in at least 2 of these cases, they found donors within 5 days.
Wow.
5 days, okay?
Wow.
And obviously, like this is not an isolated case because China has been publishing many medical articles about their advantage on transplant. They have this transplant tourism. They actively recruit people from Taiwan, from Korea, South Korea, from US, from UCLA, technically speaking, to China for transplant, for quick transplants. You just need to pay the money. They can find the donors within 24 hours.
I know it's going to,
It's insane.
I know in Pakistan, a friend of mine is over there, he's a pastor, but he is dealing with the organ harvesting there as well, because they will take teenagers and they will kill the teenagers, take all the organs out, and they discard the bodies like trash in trash cans. And they, I got pictures from there, and there's hundreds of these teenagers. So is this the same thing that's happening in China and Wuhan? Is that they're not willing organ donors, right?
Yeah.
And they're just doing, I hate equating things to Hitler, but it's really Hitler-styled medical research of just doing it regardless. I mean, it's not really ethical research.
This Chinese forced organ harvesting comparing to other nations, the biggest difference, like in China, this is state sanctioned. It's organized by the Chinese government. The officials, police, would arrest Falun Gong from their home. They were taken to detention centers, go through systematic blood type tests by hospitals. They are documented, and then like when the patients come, they can just take them out for to be killed. And they built this system. I think they built this system. They have been doing that for decades to death row prisoners. You probably have heard something.
Right.
But Falun Gong gave them became a big source for them because Falun Gong people, they meditate, they don't smoke, they don't drink, so they
Their
have the
bodies
best
were pure.
organ.
Right.
Best organs out there.
Yeah, but once the system's built, right, they're not going to just stop at Falun Gong because Falun Gong went underground in 2001. It became harder and harder for them to chase down who practiced Falun Gong. They rely on neighbors to report them to the authority. And obviously they started to target Uyghurs in Xinjiang province. You have probably heard on news, China built concentration camps in
Right.
Xinjiang to detain like 1 or 2 million Uyghurs there. And recent news I heard like they are building transplant centers next to the concentration camps. And I also heard from news in Wuhan that in Wuhan several hundred college students disappeared.
Well, let me ask you a question. These people that are in jail and outside of the Falun Gong, are they people who don't have families?
They usually have families, and I actually saw the interview to several Falun Gong practitioners about what they encountered in China. So what happened is that once they were taken to detention center, the police will ask them about their family situation, right? If they have many connections, if they're from the city, they have many friends, went to visit them, and family would visit them, they are less likely to disappear.
Okay.
And
all right.
but they would really target those from countryside. And sometimes, like when they persecute Falun Gong, they also persecute family members. So sometimes the family members were so scared, they dare not visit Falun Gong, their relatives, like in prison. And then these victims are most likely to disappear from the concentration camps.
Okay, well, that makes sense.
That's incredible that the world news doesn't bring this out. I mean, if our news agencies have financial interest over there, then they're massively immoral by not revealing these things.
Definitely. I feel like the international news, they should have covered this, but they didn't. And I feel very sorry about this. And I now want to address what you mentioned at the beginning about infiltration to the education system.
Yes.
And one thing I want to mention, have you ever heard about the Confucius Institute? It's a program sponsored by the Chinese government. They are free to universities in the US, to other world, and also to high schools. It's called Confucius Classroom. But it's not free, actually. Like, they have their agenda. The Confucius Institute in universities like UCLA, they teach the Communist Party's version of Chinese history. Basically, they said the Korean War was started by Americans because Americans want to invade North Korea. And that's what I learned in China, okay, in high school. And you cannot talk anything about Tibet, Tiananmen Massacre, and Taiwan.
Right.
And the teachers were usually recruited from China. They must sign contract that they cannot practice Falun Gong. And oftentimes in local universities like University of San Diego and UC San Diego and University of Maryland, local Confucius Institute blocks universities from inviting Dalai Lama from coming to do a commencement speech. So basically, once the university has a Confucius Institute, they became heavily infiltrated by the Chinese government on what they can teach, and they...
Wow.
I was honored to be a guest of Jan's from Epoch Times to the dance group. And I always really wipe out the name. How do you say the dance?
Shenyun
Right.
Performing Arts.
Shenyun Performing Arts. And if anybody has never seen that, you need to see it. And I got a little bit of the history of that, and that's actually banned in China.
Exactly.
You can't, because that was the opposite. Essentially, the thinking process was the opposite of the Communist Party.
It's quite interesting because actually the traditional Chinese culture is against communism, because traditional Chinese culture are all based on something like, very much like Western culture, like you should be honest, you should be compassionate to others, you should not fight, but all of these are, to Communist Party's independent thinking. So right after Communist Party took over China, they started a systematic wipeout of traditional Chinese culture. As a matter of fact, when I grew up in China, all the performing arts I saw there was about praising the Communist Party. They distorted all the historical stories on the textbook to praise the Communist Party and try to make us believe that ancient Chinese culture was bad, was ugly. And I learned my own culture after I came to the US. And I was very surprised when I saw Shenyun in 2007, the first time. I was very shocked because they perform a show without communism.
They transcend an emotion, and this is going to be about 1 minute left. They transcend, I believe, the spirit of the Chinese people when you watch that. It was very emotional for me to watch. Have you ever seen it?
No, I never have.
You need to see it.
I know it's going to be here through April, I believe.
It's unbelievable. And I said that. I was interviewed afterwards, and I said that. It transcends you into another world when you watch it. And that is representative of the Chinese people.
Definitely.
Without a doubt. Is there a website that they can go and see any of your talks? Because you're out on lecture all the time.
I have not, but I would love to come back
should.
at another time to talk to you about
This is going to be
more topics.
This is going to be around for a while. I would be really happy to have you back.
Definitely.
Actually, in a week, in 2 weeks, because this is going to be a topic for a long time.
It's going to be. Oh yeah.
So
yeah.
I would love to have you back 2 weeks from now. And not next week, the following week.
Yeah, that'd be
Rather
perfect.
come back.
That'd be perfect.
Because I think there's so much that needs to be discussed that's not being discussed of what's happening in the world's cultural shifts and changes. On that, I really am honored to have you here on our show tonight.
Thank you.
Yan, thank you for referring. And on that
Thank
note, I
you.
want to thank everybody, and we'll give the chicken wing again. And I give the chicken wing, they're transferred
There
over
we go.
there.
There we go.
So
And I was
can I
com-
say
and I-
something as my last
Yes.
conclusion? Like, let's
Absolutely.
call the virus the Chinese Communist Party virus, the
CCP,
CCP virus,
yeah,
because
CCP.
that does not stand for Chinese. The real Chinese are people like us. We love traditional Chinese culture. We love Shenyun. We don't want to have any communism in China.
See, and the reason why I relate to that massively is because I am part Mohawk and Apache. So our traditions in dance, in language, everything else transcends who we are as a people. And that's why I related to that performance so much. It was just, everybody, you've got to watch it. That's all I can say. Because it will give you an understanding that you've never seen before. And on that note, I'm just going to say thank you for watching again this evening. We'll see you next Thursday. Ted, take it on home.
The one thing I'm going to comment before I make my standard closing line, and that's this. There has been some attacks on Chinese nationals, Chinese American citizens that were born here, blaming them for the Chinese Communist Party virus. We need to stop doing that. We do.
Absolutely.
And as I always say, ignorance prevails when rational minds sit back and do nothing. Be sure to tune in next week and the week after that when we'll bring Dr. Chen back.
Bye-bye.
You're listening to The Voice of Reason with Mark Reed and Ted Durden, only on LA Talk Radio.